So today I want to go over a werewolf build for the Druid where you don't use any spirit spenders and all of your damage is coming from basic skills. And this type of build is pretty unique when it comes to Diablo 4, and I'm also working on a bunch of different variations for this build, and I almost consider this variation to kind of be the baseline, more simple version. And the basis of this build is using massively juiced up basic skills for all of your damage and adding in a bunch of defensive skills and offensive buffs to make those basic skills just do massive amounts of damage. And the main piece of gear this build is built around is the Great Staff of the Crone. And the special of this is Claw is now a storm skill and also casts Storm Strike at 150% damage. So essentially what this is doing is anytime we use Claw, we're also using a Storm Strike at much higher damage. So we're basically getting 2 basic skill casts for every time we use one. And one of the roles on this weapon is to get a massive increase to the ranks of Claw, and I have the max roll at 9, so my Claw now has 17 ranks put into it, making it deal just massive amounts of damage. So just the special of this unique weapon massively increases the damage you're going to be able to do, making it a requirement for this build to actually work. But the second most important part of this build is going to be the legendary aspect that increases the duration of our Grizzly Rage by 5 seconds, but the most important part of this is when we hit critical strikes while in Grizzly Rage, we increase our critical strike damage by 10%. And this stacks. Every crit you hit, this gives you another stack of this 10%, meaning when we're in Grizzly Rage, we're just going to be stacking our critical strike damage massively high because of how fast we're hitting. Because not only are we going to be getting 2 ability uses in one from our Staff of the Crone, we're also going to be using a bunch of attack speed increases to just become a turret of basic skills. And I'm still doing some testing when it comes to our skill tree, so some of these points may change. But first off, we're maxing out both Claw and Storm Strike because that's where most of our damage is going to come from. Storm Strike also being really good because it's always going to be giving us a 25% damage reduction when we use it, so that'll be up majority of the time. Then upgrade 1 for Storm Strike has a chance to immobilize, upgrade 2 has a chance to make enemies vulnerable, and this is going to be really good for constantly applying vulnerable because Storm Strike also has a cleaving effect. Then for upgrade 1 of Claw, its attack speed is increased by 10%. Upgrade 2, which is very important, Claw has a 10% chance to attack twice. And if this procs, we're not only going to be attacking twice with Claw, but Storm Strike is also going to be proccing twice as well. So you'll notice some pretty big damage chunks. That's coming from the 10% chance for Claw to attack twice. Then we're going down to defensives. We're using Cyclone Armor, gives us non-physical damage reduction. Then when we proc it, does some damage and knocks all enemies back. Upgrade 1, we slow enemies when we use the active. Upgrade 2, every 10 seconds. This will give us a big damage reduction once it procs. Then we're using Blood Howl, which is just a big percentage heal, which is going to be really good because we have a lot of health in this build. Upgrade 1 reduces the cooldown by 1 second on every kill, meaning we're going to be able to use this very frequently. Upgrade 2 increases our attack speed by 15% for 4 seconds, which in most situations we'll be able to have this up almost 100% of the time. Then we're also taking Debilitating Roar, a massive damage reduction for all enemies in range. Upgrade 1 gives us a massive Fortify. Upgrade 2 heals us for percentage of our max health. We have a lot of max health on this build, so it's a very big heal. Then we're going down to our Wraith skills. We're putting 1 point into Hurricane, which is just a big AoE around us, lasts for 8 seconds, 20-second cooldown. Upgrade 1 slows enemies who are hit. Upgrade 2 makes them deal less damage after being hit by Hurricane. And even though we're only putting 1 point in this, Hurricane is not only going to deal some pretty big damage, but it's also just going to help us proc a lot of additional effects, because with this build, Hurricane is also going to be a werewolf skill. Then we're going down to getting our ultimate, Grizzly Rage. This is going to be one of the most important parts of the build, and it's going to massively buff us up in a bunch of different ways. Upgrade 1 makes us unstoppable. This is the only unstoppable in this build, which is very important, Diablo 4. Upgrade 2, it just constantly keeps reapplying Fortify to us when it's active. Then for our capstone, Lupine Ferocity, every 6 hit of any werewolf skill is a guaranteed crit and deals 60% increased damage, and since basically every damaging ability we're using in this build is a werewolf skill, this will just be constantly proccing. And then we have our passives, starting out with Predatory Instinct, increased critical strike chance against close enemies, and we're always going to be close to enemies we're damaging. Then we're putting 2 points into increased movement speed while in werewolf form. We're in werewolf form 100% of the time, and I've been going back and forth having 3 points into this or removing that third point to use in some other areas. But if you like more speed, you'll be able to take out another point in other areas to put that third point to get some additional speed. Then 3 points into Ancestral Fortitude, non-physical resistances increased by 15%. Then Vigilance, after you use a defensive skill, you gain 15% damage reduction for 6 seconds. We have 3 defensive skills, one where we're going to be massively reducing its cooldown, so that's just some pretty big damage reduction most of the time. Now the spot I've been playing around with is the passives in our Wrath section. 1 into Elemental Fortitude, your storms have a chance to make enemies vulnerable. This is mainly get other passives. 1 into Endless Tempest, increase the duration of Hurricane, and I've been messing around to see if putting 3 points into this is going to overall be better, but right now just 1 point. Then 3 points into Bad Omen. It's a lucky hit, up to a 30% chance when dealing damage to vulnerable, immobilized, or stun enemies to also hit them with a lightning bolt, dealing a pretty big chunk of damage. And I'm thinking for overall damage, this is going to be much better than a lot of the other passive options. Then we're going down 1 into Neurotoxin, swinging 3 into Envenom. Poison enemies take 60% additional critical strike damage. We have 3 additional points on our necklace, which is very good. And the main way we're going to be proccing this is 1 point into Toxic Claws. Critical strikes with your werewolf skills deals a small amount of poison damage over 4 seconds. Now this is really good because we can easily apply Toxic to basically all enemies. And since all of our damaging skills in this build are werewolf skills, even something like Hurricane will apply this poison to all enemies it crits. We don't care about the damage of this poison, we just want it applied so a bunch of our other effects are procced, allowing us to do a lot more damage and take a lot less damage from poisoned enemies. Then 3 points into Defiance. Nature skills deal 12% increased damage to elites, and basically all of our damage is also considered nature damage. Then 3 into Defensive Posture, increases the amount of Fortify you gain by 15%. Then 1 into Nature's Resolve, 5% chance when being struck to fortify you for 4% of your base life. This actually does generate quite a lot of Fortify. And then next up we have our Spirit Boons. First off, we have Wariness, take reduced damage from elites, always good. Then we have Swooping Attacks, 10% increased attack speed. This is very strong because we want as much attack speed to just spam out more basic skills. Then Calamity, extend the duration of your ultimate skills by 25%. A lot of our damage scaling is going to come from being in Grizzly Rage as long as possible. Then Masochistic, critical strikes with shapeshifting skills heal you for 3% of your maximum life, and all of our damage is going to be shapeshift skills, so we're going to be able to spam heal ourselves very quickly. And then Calm Before the Storm, lucky at chance, nature skills have up to a 10% chance to reduce the cooldown of your ultimate skill by 2 seconds. Again, very important to be able to stay in Grizzly Rage as long as possible. And next up we have our Paragon Boards. Now to make this more simple for the video, I'm primarily going to be going over the boards and the glyph options we're going for. I will have a link in the description to a build planner, so if you want to get more intricate with the exact paths I'm taking right now and all the magic and rare nodes I'm getting, check out that build planner. But I'm also probably going to be switching up this build once I max out all of my Paragon points. Not level 100 yet, but this board layout is pretty good. I just think when I max out, I think there's going to be a little bit more optimization I can get. So the glyph on our starting board, we're taking Territorial, deal more damage to close targets for all the dexterity within range. Then you take reduced damage against close enemies, and again, all of our damage is going to be in melee range. Then board 1, we're going to be taking Thunderstruck. Storm skills deal 30% increased critical strike damage against vulnerable or immobilized enemies. We can apply both of those pretty easily, so this is going to be a very good first legendary. And our first glyph is going to be Earth and Sky. Increase the damage to all magic nodes within range, and then nature damage skills deal 10% increased damage to crowd controlled or vulnerable enemies, so a pretty big damage bonus. And this is one of the ones I'm messing around with, either removing or putting it somewhere else and putting a different glyph here. Then going to the right, we're going to be having Heightened Malice. When 3 or more enemies are poisoned near you, you deal 45% increased damage, and again, we're going to be able to apply poison very easily to lots of enemies. Then the glyph we're using is Fang and Claw, grants a bonus to all magic nodes within range, and then while in werebear or werewolf form, close enemies take increased damage from you. This is another one that I'm toying around with moving to a different area. I'm trying to find the best areas for these glyphs that have increased bonuses to magic nodes, so some possible optimization to come with this node as well. Then next up, we're going to go up, and we're going to be using the Inner Beast node. Now we're not taking this legendary effect. This is primarily just another board to progress through. The glyph is going to be Undaunted. You do more damage while fortified, and we're going to be fortified basically 100% of the time. Then we gain damage reduction based on the amount of fortify we have. This is a very big damage increase because we're fortified all the time, then some damage reduction. Then we're going to be going over to the right of this, and we're going to be taking the Constricting Tendrils node, and we're currently not taking this. I do want to do some testing and see if this is a legendary effect worth taking, so there's still going to be some testing to do with that, but at a base we're not taking that, but we're going down and getting the Exploit glyph. You do more damage to vulnerable enemies, but the biggest part about this is getting the secondary effect, where when you damage an enemy, they become vulnerable for 3 seconds, has a 20-second cooldown per enemy. This makes it that the first time we damage every enemy, they have a guaranteed vulnerable applied to them. This just makes applying vulnerable much more smooth and makes us much more bursty. Then past that, we're going down here and going to the right. We're taking the Lust for Carnage board. We're not taking this legendary effect. We're primarily using this to go down and take the final glyph socket, which is probably going to be the Werewolf glyph. Makes you deal increased damage while in werewolf form. In the secondary, you take reduced damage while in werewolf form. Very good, and we're going to be in werewolf 100% of the time, so this is just going to be a massive increase to damage and survivability. And for the rare nodes, you're basically just going to want to be taking everything you go past when going to the different legendary nodes and the different glyphs. And again, there'll be a build planner in the description that'll be much more easy to follow than in a video format. And then next up, we have our legendary aspects and our uniques. So first off, we have our uniques. We already went over the Great Staff of the Chrome. This is a requirement for this build to actually work. And my roll on this is pretty ridiculous. This is easily the best rolled weapon I've gotten in the game so far, and a full requirement for this build. Then for our helmet, we have Tempest Roar. This is pretty much a requirement for this build as well. The first part we don't use. It just can generate you more spirit. We're currently not using spirit on anything, but the main part is your base storm skills are now also werewolf skills. So this makes things like Hurricane, Cyclone Armor, and Storm Strike all also count as werewolf skills. And as we just went over through all of our different effects and our Paragon boards, we have massive buffs to werewolf skills. So this is basically needed, massively increases your damage and allows you to be in werewolf form 100% of the time. Then I'm also using Mad Wolf's Glee, makes werewolf form your true form, gives +2 ranks to all werewolf skills. And again, since everything's a werewolf skill now, +2 ranks is really good. You don't need this chest piece, it's just very good. And if you're not using this chest piece, you can just use the legendary aspect that stacks up armor as you deal damage. That's going to be a very good replacement if you don't have this chest piece yet. Then for legendary aspects, I'm currently using the basic skills gain attack speed on my necklace. So it gets up to 45% increased attack speed because the necklace has 1.5 times the effect. I think this is generally just really good to have on your necklace. Massively increased attack speed, making you just do a lot more damage, and also heals you a lot more because you can attack so much more. Then we have one of our Grizzly Rage aspects, increases the duration, very good for staying in it longer. Then all the crits you deal while in Grizzly Rage constantly give you stack and critical strike damage. Again, we already went over this, but this is one of the main parts of the build, allows us to just get massive damage boosts while in Grizzly Rage. Then we have the Overcharge aspect, lucky hit up to a 20% chance when dealing lightning damage to overload the target, causing any direct damage you deal to them to pulse more damage around them. And this is really good for AoE damage, and even though you may think, oh, only 3200 damage, that's very low. That's the base damage. This scales very heavily, and this will be causing quite a lot of AoE damage. Then on our gloves, we have another important aspect. Grizzly Rage now shapeshifts you into a dire werewolf instead of a werebear, and as a dire werewolf, you gain increased movement speed instead of the normal damage reduction, and a spirit cost reduction, which we don't use spirit, but you also heal for 10% of your maximum life anytime you kill something. So now when we're in Grizzly Rage, it's a werewolf skill, so we can still use all of our normal skills. We gain massively increased movement speed, and you heal 10% of your max life every kill. This adds just a massive amount of healing, and this is another requirement for the build because it turns it into a werewolf skill. Then on our legs, we gain damage reduction while shapeshift into a werewolf. This is very good, just damage reduction 100% of the time. Then on our boots, Debilitating Roar is now a werewolf skill, and it will immobilize any poison poisoned enemies. Now the primary reason we're using this is just so Debilitating Roar is again a werewolf skill, but when you're doing much higher content like high nightmare dungeons, immobilizing basically all enemies around you can actually be really good when you're fighting big packs of elites, because you can poison them, immobilize them, and this will allow you to take one out, then go to the other, take that one out, without all of them hitting you at the exact same time. Now there are some pretty important pieces you're going to need for statting. Now I'm not going to go over any of the uniques because you can't change any of the roles, but these 3 uniques we're using actually have decent roles for this build. Now some of the most important stuff is, say for a necklace, we want movement speed, damage reduction while fortified is going to be good for anywhere you can get it, werewolf skill damage is decent, then ranks 2 Envenom passive is very good like we went over. This massively increases our critical strike damage to poison enemies, and all enemies are basically always going to be poisoned, so this is just a massive critical strike increase. For your rings, you want Lucky at Chance, maximum life, critical strike damage. Those are the best rolls. Lightning damage is okay, and damage to slowed enemies on this ring, I would definitely like to change off. Basically, any other damage roll that's going to work well for us is going to be really good as well. Then for our boots, again, we're going to want movement speed. This is actually pretty important because since we're a close range melee build, you want as much movement speed as you can get, and this build is much more of a high tier, search for elites, kill elites very well, and move on to the next pack. It's not as good at clearing out all these small enemies in an area, so you want as much movement speed as possible, and the movement speed from boots and from our necklace is just going to make us ridiculously fast. Then we just want defensives. Armor while in werewolf going to be good. All stats is decent. Damage reduction while injured is going to be much more important than you think when at higher tiers. If you're going into higher tier nightmare difficulties, stuff is still going to be able to chunk you quite a lot. And since this build is a bit more focused on healing very quickly, you're going to constantly be fluctuating heavily. So this damage reduction can help you stay alive to constantly be healing up. Then for the legs, we just want all tanky stats. Damage reduction from close enemies is a top roll. Max life is a top roll. Damage reduction is a top roll. Then again, damage reduction while injured. All very good top rolls. Then on our gloves, we want attack speed, one of the best rolls. Lucky at Chance, one of the best rolls. Critical strike damage, one of the best rolls. Damage to injured enemies, I would like to switch out for basically any other damage roll that's going to work with this build. And that's pretty much the entirety of this build. And again, this build is very simple if you have all these parts we went over. And like I mentioned, this is basically the base version of this type of build. There's a bunch of other variations of this build I'm working on, and I think this is such a good foundation just because it's a build that doesn't use any spirit, doesn't use any spirit spenders, primarily focus on your basic skills. You have so many different options to change up this build with using different ultimates or some additional different damaging skills, so keep an eye out for those builds coming soon. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.